So I think we still have a few people on their way down, but I'm going to call to order the meeting of the District Communications Committee on Thursday, October 10th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. in the Triton High School Library. I'm going to go around and do introductions first. So I'm Nerissa Wallen. I'm the chairperson of the Triton Regional School Committee. Neil?
Hi, Neil. Okay.
Yep.
Neil Harrington, Town Manager in Salisbury.
Larry White, Raleigh Finance Committee.
Shut yours off.
Chairman of the Raleigh Board of Selectmen.
Freeman Condon, Salisbury Board of Selectmen.
Brian Forget, Superintendent of Schools, Triton Regional.
Joe Perry, Board of Selectmen, Raleigh.
Edith Sensilla, Finance Committee.
Alicia Greco, Town of Newbury Board of Selectmen.
Mike Doyle, Town of Newbury Board of Selectmen.
Bonnie Ray Parrott.
Bonnie Ray Parrott, Salisbury Board of Selectmen.
Maureen Heffernan, School Committee.
Jeff Walker, Newbury Selectmen.
Damon Jesperson, Newbury Selectmen.
Paul Mayette, Newbury Finance Committee.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I just wanted to have a quick minute here too, because we used to have someone around this table who recently passed away. So I want to just take a minute and acknowledge Frank Brumley's passing from the Newbury Finance Committee. So he was a valuable part of this group while he was here, and we definitely appreciate the time that he spent. If you could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, the meeting notes from the September 5th, 2019 meeting are in there. We don't need a vote, but if there are any questions or comments as to the notes, we can get corrections in if they need to be made. Seeing none, I will move on to item 4, confirming the municipal negotiations representative, which is not going to happen right now because the meeting before the meeting did not have enough attendees. So it now has been tabled, and it will become the meeting after the meeting. So those of you who have been designated by your towns, which would be Freeman, Cliff, and Damon, if you could hang out after the meeting is over, we'll bring that back up and make that selection for the municipal negotiations representative. School business administrator, I'm going to bump this one to Brian. Do you have your mic on?
I do now. Michelle is not here tonight, but that is not because she's already gone. Unfortunately, this is just bad timing with a sick child that she's dealing with tonight. But Michelle gave her notice. I first reported this to the committee last month. She was here for 3 years. Was very happy, but I'll speak on her behalf. She's always looking for a challenge. So she'll be moving to the Swampscott Public Schools. Thank you. The Marblehead, she's not going to Swampscott, I'm sorry. To the Marblehead Public Schools. There's quite a turnover in the entire administrative team there, and so she's the first of the team to be established. She likes a challenge, and apparently we didn't create enough problems here, so I guess that's a good thing. But she certainly has done tremendous work over the 3 years that she's been here. Whoever she took over for, as far as the budget, I don't know if he messed things up or what, but she's made some tremendous gains over the last 3 years, just as far as making things really efficient. Joe just got that.
I like
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.
I like that.
Just bringing some real efficiencies, and all those who've worked with her, the building principals, the secretaries, everyone who works closely with her on a daily basis, has a huge loss to see her go. But I certainly wish her the best. Very sorry to see her go. She's living on very good terms. Timing of year is very bad as far as finding a replacement this time of year. So the plan currently is to have interim arrangements. Our current treasurer is a licensed school business official. I'm still a licensed school business official. We have a retired school business administrator who has formerly been a school business administrator, assistant superintendent, superintendent. So the likely piecemealing will be, he will be in the office 2 days a week, Amy will be in the office an additional day a week, and then that fifth day will piecemeal. The goal is to sustain. This is not going to be from, I should say, I don't know if I mentioned this, Michelle is with us through December 1st. So it's the 7-month period from December 1st to June 30th. Piecemeal it together. The goal is not to advance and innovate. The goal is to maintain everything we've gained without losing any progress. I think with the plan that we have in place and the folks on board, I'm very confident of that. The plan would be to advertise the position after the new year, the calendar new year. That tends to be the season when administrators are looking, if folks are looking to make a change for a July 1 start. That doesn't mean it would take until July 1. Typically, a person in a central office role is going to have a 90 to 120-day clause in their contract to notify. So if the process begins in mid-January and is wrapped up by the end of March, April 1st, then there's a 90-day window there to make sure someone has plenty of time to give notice if they are a sitting school business official somewhere. So that's the plan at this point. I have no reason to believe that won't come through. And certainly if there is someone, and we go through that process, and someone who's not a sitting business administrator, or doesn't have a clause in their contract to give such a notice, that doesn't mean we have to wait until July 1st to seat that new business administrator. So hopefully sooner than that, but by the absolute latest, we'd have someone in place for July 1, 2020, and have a great plan in place for the 7 months once Michelle departs. So she will be here in November. Again, she shares her apologies for not being here tonight. It wasn't so she didn't have to face you. Maybe it was, so she says. But she will be here in November.
We're working on the problems in the meantime, yes. No, I'm just kidding. And to that end, I guess I just want to say, Brian has said we want to sustain and not slip. Last year, we had pulled the kind of early budget look back into the fall, and our goal is to continue to do that, to kind of meet the same schedule that we were at last year and hold kind of a similar, I don't want to call it a rollout, but a forward-looking kind of process to start in the fall so that we're not starting it right in January.
So the only thing I will add is a lot of the things that we had to be able to confirm for you at this time last year, we do not. Obviously, we are 80% salary and benefits. We can make a guess at benefits. Salaries with our two largest labor organizations, the teachers and the instructional assistants, are negotiating, hence the appointment of a municipal rep. So that is certainly going to be a driver. We can make assumptions on steps, lanes, all of that assumptions, but as far as a COLA and those other adjustments, it will be, we can make assumptions, but by the same token, it's part of negotiations, so we have to be a little more careful with that. So it's going to be far less concrete than we were able to do last year. Yeah.
All right. Any questions on that? No, it's a change. All right, moving on to item 6, the regional agreement proposed changes. So this is where I anticipate that I'm going to stop talking and you all are going to start talking. In the last meeting, we had gone through the draft from 2017, which had some proposed changes in it. Some of those were nixed, some of them were kind of amended, just the language was changed. Some of them were kept as is. The request was at the end of that meeting to take the document that had come out of that and go back to the individual boards of selectmen and the finance committees in the 3 towns to get any feedback on that document as it exists, as well as any additional proposals that you wanted to bring to the table and talk about. So I don't know if we want to start on the left and kind of go around. Oh.
Can I just clarify one more time and make sure? I sent out the document that was attached to the agenda that Patty sent out. I gave her, excuse me, the wrong one. So the draft agreement, which I believe is the one you all got from NERISA on September 9th, should say draft edit September 9th, 2019 in the top right corner, just to make sure everyone's looking at the right one. So on the front cover, should have a little blue draft edit September 9th, 2019. I believe that was the one each of the boards and the town officials took to their groups.
Does anyone need one? We do have extras. No? Everybody's got the right one? All right. I can take volunteers, or we can start here and go around. No volunteers. Larry, did the Raleigh Finance Committee take it up?
No, we did not.
Okay. Cliff?
Yes, the Raleigh Board of Selectmen took this up, and we found it acceptable, and it's,
As
from our
is?
point of view, it's as is, ready to go.
Okay. Freeman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, in a spirit of cooperation and support, the Salisbury Board of Selectmen unanimously voted to support the changes. At the same time, during that discussion, the board continued to advocate for a mechanism that all three towns sit down to talk about the assessments. We think it is the fair thing to do, the equitable thing to do, and the right thing to do. You know, in the final analysis, a school district divided against itself in the long run only hurts the kids. So we are hoping that at some point, all three towns can sit down to at least begin talks to look at the assessments.
All right, thank you. Joe, Peter, Alicia?
The Newbury Board of Selectmen has not taken up any conversation over the proposed agreement.
Okay. Do we have plans to do so?
The vice chair is here. I think I'm going to ask
All right.
him to speak to that.
Sorry, David, I should have just kept swinging around the table.
There was, I think the chair was confused about what was being asked to look at. And so he thought this was a discussion of the, what is it called? The
Assessment?
assessment.
Turn it into assessment.
And so he didn't put it on the agenda for discussion. The last time we looked at this was back in 2017. At that point, I believe we were all fairly for it, but we just, because of that miscommunication, there's three documents, the tenant,
Yeah.
the assessment, and this one. And I think because JR is very busy right now, he didn't realize what was up for discussion, and so didn't bring it forward.
Okay.
We have had some discussions around ways to move forward with all the different discussions, but we're not there yet. This, I believe, I haven't been able to catch up with him today. There shouldn't be a problem with getting this on the agenda. He just didn't realize what it was initially. So,
Okay.
and the last time the board did look at it, we approved it. So,
Okay.
so hopefully we can move it forward pretty quickly.
I was going to say, do you think between now and November, that's 15th or 16th, something like that, 14th?
14.
That's right. it's on the
Yes, I
agenda.
believe we,
22nd, we have a meeting.
yeah, we'll be meeting again this month, and so we should be able to have this on the agenda and ratify it and get it back to you,
Okay.
is my hope.
Everybody I missed? Oh, Paul,
Yeah.
sorry, my bad.
We did look at it, focusing mainly on the assessments.
Yep.
Financially. But absent hard numbers, we declined to make any recommendations right now.
Okay. All right. Great. I was just looking for real quick, Brian and I had talked about kind of the rollout moving forward, but I can't find my notes real quick. But we had talked about if we can, come to some sort of an agreement, then next month at the school committee meeting, since that's where this kind of officially has to start, is with the recommendation from the school committee to move it forward, to bring this in front of the school committee for a vote. The DCC is actually the following night. It's a little bit out of sync because both meetings end up later in the month. So we could bring that back here at that point and say, kind of, this is where we're at. We've got an official vote to sort of hand this over to you and send it back to the towns. We will have our legal counsel at the point that we have kind of this working document go through. I don't know if the towns will feel like you need to have an additional, I know there's, in most of the towns, I believe all three at least, there's been a council review already. I don't know if you'll feel like there has to be an additional one or where we'll land with that, but that would be one question that I hope we can answer come that November, whether we're going to be looking at one or not. And then at that point, we're going to need in late December, early January to begin to kind of publicize this process, I think, to let our residents in our towns know that this is something that's going to be coming to town meeting. We need to have a public hearing for that. So Tentatively, we had looked at the end of January for that. There's already a DCC meeting scheduled there. As you might remember from past years with the budget, our budget is very dependent on the numbers that the governor releases, traditionally on the fourth Wednesday in January. So we, as a DCC, have often met the following day, that Thursday afterwards. So it's later in the month than we traditionally meet. So one of the things that Brian and I talked about was to make it easy on everybody, could we do a public hearing and a DCC meeting in the same night? So, yeah.
So I was going to say, the only correction is we don't have one scheduled. We don't have a meeting scheduled for January right now.
Oh,
We
right.
scheduled through December.
That's
So
true.
we were looking, the likely governor's budget would be the 22nd. Put my glasses on. But the committee workshop is the 25th, which generally has been helpful to have the DCC after the committee has its workshop. So we were looking the week of the 27th. 29th or 30th, that's the Wednesday and the Thursday night, as you said, to combine a DCC and a public hearing, whether hearing then DCC or DCC then hearing. Because I think it's important for everyone around the table, like you were saying, to
Yeah.
hear the responses. So I think I would make the suggestion, have the hearing first, where everyone's just listening, and then bring the DCC back together. And hopefully, if we had as Damon was saying, if we had the landlord-tenant agreement, I can't even do it anymore, and the alternative assessment, those two pieces are void in this document. I think the rest of this document is fairly straightforward, so I don't think there's a lot to debate, but if there is anything that comes up, we can consider it and then be ready to pass this off to the towns for your warrants and such shortly thereafter. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask, because this is just kind of a proposal that Brian and I were putting together with a calendar on whatever day that was, yesterday morning. Any thoughts on that? Any questions about how that would work? I mean, I want to make sure that we're all kind of bought into this process, because I think it's really important, given that we've all put years at this point of work into this, that we come out with a process and a document that we're all really comfortable with. All right, seeing none, I will assume that that's the plan moving forward. Yeah? So if Newbury can come back with comments on the 15th of November, 14th of November, we'll have a school committee vote by then, so we should be, I don't want to say into the end here, but we're going to be pulling into that last turn, hopefully. I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Never thought you'd hear those words.
Nope. 2006.
All right, and a real quick state advocacy update. So I had emailed you following the Senate review of the Student Opportunity Act, which is the new ed reform bill. So the ed reform bill overall is far better than its predecessors as far as we're concerned. There were a few tweaks that we had asked Senator Tarr and Senator DeZoglio to put forward as amendments. Some of them were adopted, which was great. We definitely appreciate that. One of the big ones, as you know, is we've been short of the 100%, far short of the 100% in a lot of cases, for regional transportation reimbursement. And I do not know how this happened behind the scenes, but they had a couple of regional transportation amendments in there to move it, to try and set kind of a base, to say that it can't go lower than 85% was the big one. And somehow in there, they changed that out, and they put in that they would like the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to actually formulate a recommendation on how to get regional transportation to 100% over the fiscal year 21, 22, and 23 years, and to bring that back to the House and the Senate by essentially budget season. Their budget season, not our budget season. So while that's not something that's set in stone, that is promising, I would have to say. There's a saying that I've heard, and I was trying to actually repeat this yesterday. It's something like validate and then legislate. So the validation step always comes first. So this idea of getting a validation to say, yes, this needs to be done, and here is kind of the path to do it, it almost always comes before the legislation. So it's a step that we've needed, and it's a step that we're moving in the right direction. The representatives will...
How much would that cost the state? How much extra? I mean, is it like...
$24.5 million, I think, for all of the regional school districts right now.
That's all?
That's to get to 100%. So they're at roughly 82% right now.
It would be about $250,000 for us. But I will say, not to be the total pessimist, but they charged DESI with coming up with that figure, and DESI is notoriously, Jay Sullivan specific, good man, but doesn't believe in 100% reimbursement because he believes then that we lose the motivation to find efficiencies and conserve dollars. Because if it's all state dollars we're getting, so, just to put that caveat, it's a very
True.
positive, it's a very positive motion, but
I don't think, so the way it was written, I mean, this is just the way I took it, there's not a lot of wiggle room in saying, no, you shouldn't do it. It was find a way to get us there and make those recommendations.
language is good,
So
yeah.
I'm sure he will be saying, absolutely sure he will be saying it's bad policy, which he has said in public a number of times, but.
Loudly.
Yes, loudly, exactly. But I would certainly hope that they'll also be putting forward exactly what they're asked to do, which is those numbers.
So what about circuit breaker?
So circuit breaker, the Student Opportunity Act, should it be passed, which certainly hoping it is, would actually solve essentially that problem that we would see even for next year. So we already knew that next year we were going to take a hit on our circuit breaker funding because of the Chapter 70 funding that they put in next year. The language that's in Student Opportunity Act as it is, not amended, but just the original act, would actually stabilize that threshold and not allow it to move up, which is the problem that we would have been seeing moving forward. It would actually stabilize it more than we've seen in past years. I took the new calculation and went back 5 years to look at what it would have looked like if they did that 5 years ago, and it would be significantly smaller decreases than we've even been seeing. So we've been seeing small decreases over time. The problem is that decrease goes to like 6.1%, which is significant. Would go to that next year if they don't stabilize that. And that's jumping up from, I think the low was like 0.22% and the high was like 2.5%. So it's a significant jump compared to where we've been at. So we would very much like to see that stabilized. And then the other big thing that Student Opportunity Act does, the original act itself, is it allows us to include transportation for circuit breaker students in as part of the claim. It's a 4-year phase-in, so it would start in fiscal year 21 at 25%, moving up to 100% in fiscal year 24, I guess that would be. So the idea here would be that if we have a student that we're busing to whatever, one of the schools in the collaborative, and it's costing us whatever, $24,000 to bus them, we would claim $6,000 of that the first year. The second year, we would claim $12,000 of that as part of the circuit breaker claim for that particular student. Traditionally, the legislature has reimbursed 75% of that amount. So it wouldn't be the full amount, but it would be a reimbursement that we are getting literally no reimbursement on right now.
fully phased in, that's $400,000 more. Vicinity, $400,000+ more per year. That's a 4-year phase-in. And I will say, sitting with Jay Sullivan on this Transportation Commission, they were talking about what this all means, and he assumed, for providing the budgetary figures to the state, that every student who is on and out of district placement, all of their transportation would qualify. Because what this does is any student who hits that threshold, which is, call it roughly $46,000, if their transportation costs are in that per child, that becomes reimbursable. So he's assumed every student who is out of district and receiving transportation is already at that threshold because of their tuition, and so all of their transportation would apply towards the 75% reimbursement. So the good news, I'll give Jay some credit, is that he's providing figures that are realistic. So when he says this is what its need, or what the need is to fund, I forget the figure, 180 million, 160 million, it's a real figure.
And then the other thing was the two-step method, the formula, they're going to look at that, right?
Not the two-step method per se, but they're going to look at the ability for a town to pay, which is minimum local
Second
contribution.
step.
Yes, exactly. So if it goes through as it is right now, which I'm, again, hoping it will be, that would be up to the Department of Elementary Secondary Education and the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, to get together and come up with examine it and make recommendations on it by, I think it's the end of December 2020. So not something that's going to be actionable immediately, but again, that idea of validate and then legislate this is the validation that we need to, people are all across the Commonwealth saying, yes, there is a problem, there is a problem, there is a problem, but this would validate what the problem is and actually make recommendations that would allow the legislature to act on it. So, yes.
So as far as advocating, this is, for me, this is where I've put all my eggs all in this basket. In my discussions with any legislators, is that it's section 20 of the SOA that establishes this study, and that people understand that this is a real need. Some folks I've spoken to at the state level, DESE or otherwise, said it's just a token, that's going to happen. But I will say, again, mad props to Roger Hatch, who came out and met with Neil and I in the spring sometime. I don't think he's ever going to back down on the equalized valuation and that being the right calculation, but he's cracking. He's starting to understand that the aggregate assessment, which is the collective wealth rather than some type of mean wealth, is not the right. It's not the right way. He's not said that publicly, but he's definitely cracked in front of a lot of people saying, I need to think about that. So it's, he's a very bright man, was one of the architects of the original Formula in '93. So when he's understanding that there's a need, that's a positive sign. So that's where we need to focus our energy.
And then weren't they going to look at something for aids to rural school districts or something like that?
Yes, yep. So similar study, it actually got bigger in the Senate. It was amended quite a bit, which is good. They both took out some language that I think was very leading, talking about reorganizing regional school districts, which we all kind of nails on the chalkboard, like, you don't even want to think about the state getting involved in that, right?
That's Act 42 or 46 up in Vermont. It was bad.
Yeah. Connecticut's going through similar things right now as well, with kind of this possibility that some of their funding might be withheld if they don't regionalize. So it's not a force, but there's sort of a deterrent there to not regionalize. So that's in there. Some of the Diana DiZoglio, Senator DiZoglio, amended that to take out some of that kind of very loaded language and put in language that is similar, but like that particular line now says optimized regional school districts. So it talks about, how do you optimize them? That's a much bigger conversation. And I think it allows the data to lead to a conclusion rather than having a conclusion, the study, rather than the study saying, here's the data you need to find, here's the conclusions you need to reach. Now it says, find the data and your conclusions should sort of be around these ballpark ideas. Leaves it much more open than it was in the past. So that is it's a much bigger study. It's not done entirely at the state level. I'd have to go back and see who exactly is on it, but it's, I believe, similar in setup to the one that Brian is serving on right now for student transportation. So there's members appointed by various members of the legislature. There's going to be a member from Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, I believe. There's one from Mass Association of School Committees, Mass Association of School Superintendents, Mass Association of Regional Schools. So it's more public, and they have to hold up to five hearings, public hearings across the state as part of that process. So it allows for much more public say than this ability to pay study will. I think that's going to be one that we probably see at the end. The rural and regional will be kind of across the board. I think it's nice that they're recognizing that that declining and low enrollment is a huge problem that needs to be compensated for. Senator Hines proposed an amendment that would actually change the foundation budget to somehow recognize that issue with rural and regional schools, which I think is an ideal way to do it, because right now, minimum aid or rural school aid, anything like that is sort of an after effect. So they determine Chapter 70, and then if they have money left over, they can put it into these buckets, and those buckets kind of get doled out to those schools. This would actually put it in the foundation budget. So the way other states have done is in the foundation budget today, it essentially says, you have X number of students that fall into a specific category. So they might be an early elementary school student. They get maybe kind of extra dollars for being an English language learner student, and there are assumptions that you have certain numbers of special education students. So it could actually have a dollar value in there and say, if you're in a rural regional school district, you're going to get X number of dollars extra per student that falls into the early elementary category, for instance. Or the way, I think it's Michigan or Wisconsin does it, is they actually make the number of students count for more depending on how rural a district is. So if a student counts for one student in Worcester, just to give you an example, then a student might be worth 1.5 students if they're out in, where the heck, in Western Mass, in a really, small population district. So it makes you look like you have more students, essentially, accounting-wise, which increases. It's the idea that a student is going to cost more than a traditional student in an urban area because you're losing economies of scale simply because your enrollment's decreasing. So lots of different ways they could go with that. I'm interested to see what the House will do with that, but yeah, that's coming up down the road. So the House Ways and Means should release the new Student Opportunity Act. It's expected to be with just minor tweaks, if anything, in the next couple of days. Representatives will have the opportunity to file amendments, so we'll be looking to see what those amendments are. One of the amendments that or a number of amendments that failed in the Senate had to do with minimum aid. They were trying to increase that amount however much they could. There was a pretty drastic showdown on the Senate floor. Senator Tarr taking on a number of other, and he had company, taking on a number of other senators. It definitely was a very clear division on the floor between two parties and their beliefs on minimum aid. So that ended up all failing in the Senate, but it is possible that the House could take it up and it could have a different outcome. So we'll be watching for that as well. And if that did happen, then the House and Senate would both appoint members to a conference committee, and they would hash out the differences to make a final recommendation to go on to the governor. Yeah, no, it's rural and urban pretty much. Yeah, so it was strongly the Bostons and places like that saying, that they don't believe in a minimum aid, that in large part they think that a lot of the districts that are receiving minimum aid are wealthy enough to fully support their school districts locally, and that they don't need additional state aid, and that's why they haven't been getting additional state aid. Yes. So there's a lot of They do. There is a wage adjustment factor that already is in the formula. So in theory, that's taken account for, but, yeah. So it's going to be a long kind of ongoing conversation, I think, on that one. That's going to be an interesting one. But I will say, if they adjust minimum local contributions, that could help us kind of bump up as far as what the state thinks we can afford, because they always have to make up the difference. So if what they think we can afford goes down, right, then the state has to pick up a bigger share. So that could help us out on our side. And if they do something on schools with decreasing enrollment, that helps affect what they think our schools should cost, because that's one of the biggest issues right now is our schools cost to run because of losing economies of scale, cost to run significantly more than the state calculates that they should. If they take that into account, then the amount that they think we should be putting towards our schools could go up considerably. And those two things could balance out to actually take us out of minimum aid and put us back into foundation aid, depending on how it's done. Yeah, I know, complicated.
That's deep. So the bottom line is, remember, foundation, let me interpret. So foundation is what the state says you should be spending for an adequate education. That's step one. The message is, thank you for everything you've done to correct foundation, to move it towards a realistic assumption. Now you need to do the second step, which is a town's ability to pay. Because that minimum local contribution, the difference between that and the foundation is what sets your Chapter 70. So if what the realistic cost of education is being reflected, and then we move to something that better reflected a town's true ability to pay, if that comes down while this is going up, then you actually have a bigger gap. That's foundation aid. That means Chapter 70 goes up. So you look at, there's a new tool that DESE's putting out, very interesting to look at the wealth and to look at the two districts, Pentucket and Triton, side by side. And the assumption that we're at 105% and Pentucket as a district is at 79%. Won't go into the details other than to say it's just broken. So that second step is so our mantra is thank you, But this hasn't been Chapter 70 reform, this has been foundation reform. Let's do real Chapter 70 reform and Port Section 20. Simple.
Yep.
Wish it were that simple.
So that's Student Opportunity Act. So as soon as the House kind of takes it up and runs with it, I'll be able to give you a better idea of what's going to go on with it, kind of sight unseen. I can't venture where they'll go. We've had conversations with our representatives. In particular, we both saw Representative Hill on Saturday, and I think they're ready to fight. So that's always a good thing. There has been a fiscal year 19 supplemental budget that was filed. It contains $1.2 million more in regional transportation aid and $2 million more in circuit breaker aid. If the legislature is going to act on that to take advantage of the surplus, effectively the surplus from last year, it has to be by October 31st. So we're going to be watching that to see if anything happens there. I'm certainly hopeful it will, and they're not just going to let that money kind of go. But, no guarantees on that side, so be keeping an eye on that. And it became quite clear today that the senators are looking towards some revenue from this year, so fiscal year 20. So Senator Tarr and Senator Goby, who is, I think, like just north of Worcester, sent a letter today that we all got copied on. They sent it to the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, asking him to consider $2.6 million more in regional transportation for this year, for the current year. So
That gets to 85.
Huh?
That gets to 85.
That gets to 85%, yeah, from the 82% we're at right now. So again, I'm assuming that they're sending that letter and communicating it to us because they believe that another supplemental bill for this year would be imminent. I guess, we'll see where that goes.
I confirm with Jenny McCullough that it's Jennifer McCullough in Senator Tarr's office, that this is kind of the first step in the process to bait. They haven't even settled the fiscal 19 supplemental budget, but they're already ready, looking at the revenues with a fiscal 20 that hopefully won't take as long.
Yes.
So just to clarify too, so technically a fiscal 19 supplemental budget, even though it's happening in a fiscal 20, is fiscal 19 revenues. So right now, we're assuming our certified E&D would be 420,000. That being the case, that would add, and again, we have to wait for DOR. Anytime this happens, kind of outside the scope, we have to wait for DLS to give us guidance on how that's booked. But technically, that is fiscal 19 revenue. Either way, it draws through to reserved funds for us. It's not any money that we could spend.
So I guess there's a lot of possibility out there. I'm hoping a good portion of it comes to fruition. I think it's really encouraging where we are right now compared to where we even were a month ago, because if you had asked me a month ago if any of this was going in our direction, I would have said no, we were going backwards.
And she was the positive one.
And I was the positive one. Yeah, I know, exactly. Brian was dragging me backwards. He was sure it was all negative. So I think it's good, and I just, I think that our representatives and our senators are doing a terrific job representing us right now. I mean, there are 40 senators in the Senate, and ours was one of the two that's out there saying $2.6 million. When you put out a fiscal year 20 supplemental budget, $2.6 million is what we want for regional transportation, bring it to 85%. And that's very strong. I know there are a lot of other parts of Massachusetts that would love to have our senators and representatives. I hear that every day, that they're doing great work. So I just want to give them the acknowledgement that across the board, they're doing wonderful things. And I think I would be remiss too if I didn't say that the precursors to the Student Opportunity Act were not good for Triton. I know we've had lots of conversations around all of that. Senator Lewis came out into the Salisbury Public Library, and we hosted a meeting there with all of the other districts. I think it was Senator DeZoglio's other school districts, if I remember correctly, that were in for that. He heard it. I mean, he's not our senator, and he did, I think, an excellent job of distilling everything he heard across the state, because he went to night after night after night of those meetings, and he did an excellent job of taking everything that he heard, and even if it wasn't something that could immediately be addressed, I think he did a good job of putting in all of these validation studies so that if there isn't something in fiscal year '21, we have something to act on moving forward to say, yes, this is a need. It's been validated as a need. We have recommendations. We can get then our senators and our representatives to file legislation on our behalf because it's proven. It's proven that these things are needed. So I think he kind of teed things up where things couldn't be included in this bill. He teed them up for the future, and I have great respect for that. So I think he did a phenomenal job, and I thank him for coming out here and everything that he did.
Absolutely.
Didn't he include in his presentation a slide that was called the Triton effect?
He did. Yes. So Senator DiZoglio told me that before they release the bill to the public, traditionally they have like a quick overview. They literally gather all the senators in a room, and they have a slideshow that just goes through the high points. And I understand that when he brought up the circuit breaker slide, he actually said, this is the Triton effect. So and Brian wrote the memo. We've been pushing it. Our Policy and Advocacy Committee has been, I don't even know how many people they've emailed, but they emailed school committee members, they emailed, we had someone that was reaching out to Mass Teachers Association representatives. They were reaching out to select people. Any place that we could find somebody that was in a similar situation to us, where we could try and gain traction and ask them to go to their legislators, we've done that, and I think that proved out here.
That was huge, because I went as far south as Sharon, and I sang that song, and people listened. And I had people stand up from, this one gentleman, selectman from the town of Acton, got up, and he said the same thing. He said, this is wrong, and this has to be fixed. And so they did hear it.
Yeah. Senator DiZoglio asked me to do that education policy presentation for what they call senators, which is they host something in their local district and they invite other senators to come in. So she had about 8 or 9 legislators there, and it was literally the day before the Student Opportunity Act came out, which I didn't know at the time, but she probably had an idea. So they're all sitting there, and I had pulled numbers together by senator for all the districts that were going to be hit hard, and I put our district's, her district's numbers up on a slide, and then I said, your numbers are in the packet that you have in front of you. And I don't think they heard the next 3 slides because they were literally all going through the numbers. Senator Brownsberger from Boston was there, and Boston's hit for circuit breaker next year would have been $1.1 million. And it woke them up. I mean, there was, I think, I don't want to say there was panic in that room, but there was definite concern. They wanted to know that that was going to be resolved. So they've given us, our legislators have done a phenomenal job. We've done everything we can locally, and I know you have all done. I know Alicia's been getting up in presentations at MMA.
And I think MMA as an organization is struggling to understand our town's plight. They're very invested in the Boston Senator Chang Diaz, and not that it's riveting television, I wouldn't often suggest it, but that debate last Thursday night, and it was Senator Chang Diaz and Senator Tarr going back and forth, and the things coming out of her mouth, didn't believe there should be any minimum aid, let alone 30. So it's very telling, where I don't think MMA is going to come to the aid of our towns.
Well, I just read in an article, a letter that he wrote, the head of the MMA, the director, can't think of his name right now.
Beckwith.
Yes, Jeff Beckwith. He wrote in, I think it was the last Beacon we got, he wrote an article about it, and he specifically mentions the aid to rural, that the work needs to still be done for rural communities in the Commonwealth. So I think they did hear it. Well, they're going to hear it again because I'm going back.
Yeah, I don't think they've been advocating for it. I mean, they were the numbers that came out last week right before the vote, they were very much against those numbers being put out there because it brought light to the fact of what we've been saying all along, that we've been getting about $65,000, $68,000 a year in Chapter 70. That's what we'll get under the new bill. So the circuit breaker is what gives us some new monies until that study is done. But the study is either going to say there's more money needed on top of the $1.5 billion, or it's going to reallocate the $1.5 billion differently. And if it's reallocating the $1.5 billion differently, it's dead on arrival.
So that said, thank you for all your advocacy, because I know you've been out there too. This is not the end, obviously, so I'll keep sending you emails. I'm sure that they're riveting, but it's just a matter of making sure that I am reasonably sure that a bill is going to go through. It's for the Student Opportunity Act. It's just a matter of what's in it now. So the ideal situation is just make sure that it's as good of a bill for us as it can possibly be in the long run. A lot of that is on now our representatives, but that's on us to make them understand where our concerns are. So, all right, that was it, I think, unless there are any conversations, anything else? All right, I don't officially need a motion to adjourn, so thank you all for coming. The 14th of November is the next meeting. It's in Salisbury Town Hall. I should check this with Freeman. Can you, or can your? Can you guys make sure that the Salisbury Town Hall is set for that night? Okay. Well, I know you always point at Ronnie whenever I ask you something, so. Oh, okay. Okay. It's a Thursday.
And nurse, do we have the date for December?
We do. It's December 5th, I think. Let me check real quick. That is, I like it. We're never meeting in Rowley, or at Triton again. Yeah, it's December 5th is the December meeting. And then we hadn't pulled dates farther than that because we weren't sure where we were going to be in this regional agreement process. But I think ideally we want to set up, based on the nods I saw around the table, that the public hearing and a DCC in January on the same night. And then potentially, I guess even December, we could set up the entire springtime if you guys want. I know it's easier to plan ahead if we have it planned out, scheduled out. Okay. All right. Excellent. So Cliff, Freeman, and Damon need to hang around for confirming the municipal negotiations representative. I'll send out a name by email so that you all know who it is, or if you want to hang around, you're welcome to do that too. Otherwise, I will see you all on the 14th of November. Thank you.